Riens, if you're ready to experience a horror movie that doesn't rely on flashy effects or a big cast, but still manages to burrow deep into your mind and send shivers down your spine, then Creep, 2014, is the film for you. This is not your typical horror movie. It's strange, it's uncomfortable, it's brilliantly simple, and above all, it's disturbingly effective. So before we dive into the creepy world of this film, make sure to like this video. That's your first step into this unsettling journey. And if this is your first time visiting our channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We got tons of videos on movies that are offbeat, underrated, or just too good to miss, and Creep is definitely one of them. In today's video, we're going to talk about the film Creep, a psychological horror thriller that's found its place as a cult favorite among fans of truly original cinema. We'll cover everything you need to know about this movie, from what the film is all about, where and how you can watch it, to some really fascinating behind-the-scenes stories that reveal how this bizarre little film came to be. This isn't just a review. This is your full guide to understanding why Creep made such a big impact despite being so small in scale. We'll start with the most obvious question: what is Creep? At first glance, it seems like a very simple story. A man answers a mysterious online ad offering $1,000 for a day's work filming a personal documentary in a remote mountain town. Sounds harmless enough, right? But as the day progresses, things begin to take a darker turn. And what follows is an intense psychological roller coaster that you won't be able to look away from. The less you know going in, the better. But don't worry, we'll walk the fine line between giving you just enough details without spoiling the entire plot. Then we'll talk about where you can watch this film. Is it available on popular OTT platforms like Netflix or Amazon Prime? Can you find it on any satellite TV channels? I'll give you all the current streaming options so you can easily track it down. This movie may not have had a huge theatrical release, but it's been widely praised online and has found its audience through streaming, which is great news if you're curious and want to watch it right after this video. Now, let's talk about the technical side of the film. This is where things get really interesting. Creep was shot on a very low budget with a two-person cast and a tiny crew. But instead of seeing that as a limitation, the filmmakers used it to their advantage. The entire film has a raw, found footage style that feels incredibly intimate and realistic. We'll break down how the film was written, or in this case, mostly improvised, how it was shot with minimal equipment, and how the editing played a huge role in building suspense and tension. It's a masterclass in minimalist filmmaking, proving that you don't need millions of dollars to scare the life out of your audience. We'll also take a look at the production timeline, from pre-production planning, the actual shoot, to the post-production phase where the footage was carefully shaped into the terrifying final product. Despite its small budget, this film has a very polished sense of purpose. You'll learn how the creative team behind it, primarily Mark Duplass and director Patrick Brice, brought the project to life with passion, improvisation, and a lot of creative risk-taking. And yes, we'll definitely talk numbers too. What was the budget, how much did it cost to make, and how successful was it financially? Spoiler: the return on investment was pretty impressive, especially when you consider how niche and experimental this film is. It wasn't a box office blockbuster, but it performed extremely well in the indie film world and on streaming platforms, gaining a massive cult following over the years. Next up, we'll dive into the story itself. I'll give you a short review, spoiler-free, of course, that talks about the film's mood, pacing, and psychological intensity. This is the kind of horror that slowly creeps up on you, makes you question everything you're seeing, and leaves you with that eerie feeling long after the credits roll. It's not packed with jump scares or gore. Instead, it creates fear through awkward silences, strange behavior, and that constant sense that something isn't quite right. We'll also talk about the performances, especially Mark Duplass as Josef, one of the most bizarre and fascinating characters in modern horror. His performance is unsettling because of how charming, funny, and unpredictable he is. You never really know what he's thinking or what he might do next, and that makes him truly terrifying. We'll also discuss Patrick Brice's role both behind the camera and in front of it, playing the character Aaron. The chemistry between the two actors is what makes the movie feel so real and so uncomfortable. Finally, we'll explore some cool facts and trivia about the film. Did you know much of the dialogue was improvised? Or that the wolf mask in the film became so iconic, it inspired a sequel? Speaking of which, we'll also briefly touch on the sequel Creep 2 and what it added to the story, but we'll save that for another video. So friends, if you're into horror films that are smart, weird, and make your skin crawl in the best way possible, Creep is definitely worth your time. Make sure you watch this video till the end, because I'm going to share everything you need to know to fully appreciate this strange little gem of a movie. Alright, let's get into it and uncover what makes Creep one of the most unique horror experiences of the last decade. Alright friends, let's talk about the story of Creep, 2014. And I hope you're ready, because this is not your average horror plot. This one starts off slow, feels almost harmless, and then takes you on a ride that's so awkward, so uncomfortable, and so unpredictably terrifying, you won't even realize when things went from weird to straight up disturbing. And here's the best part. It all unfolds through a single camera lens. That's right, the entire story is told from the point of view of a videographer named Aaron, and this first person, found footage style isn't just a gimmick, it's the backbone of the movie's creepy magic. So here's how it begins. Aaron is just your everyday guy trying to make a little extra cash. He answers a Craigslist ad from someone offering $1,000 for a day's work filming a personal video. The job seems simple enough. The guy says he's dying of cancer and wants to make a video diary for his unborn child. A little sad, maybe even touching. Totally harmless, right? Wrong. Enter Josef, the man who placed the ad. He seems nice, a little intense maybe, a little too friendly, but he's welcoming, emotional, even vulnerable. You might feel bad for him at first. You might even like him, but you'll also feel this constant, nagging sense that something's just not right. That something is off. And trust me, it is. The movie plays with this weird tension from the very beginning. Nothing major happens at first. No ghosts, no monsters, no blood. But what it does instead is way scarier. It builds this unbearable sense of discomfort. Josef invites Aaron to do some really strange things. He talks about death a little too casually. He jumps out at Aaron as a joke just to see his reaction. He wears a creepy wolf mask named Peach Fuzz and dances around in the tub. Yes, you heard that right. He sings a lullaby to Aaron while pretending to be a friendly wolf. It's weird, it's awkward, and somehow it's also terrifying. Because you just don't know if this guy is mentally unstable, secretly dangerous, or both. The narrative unfolds in a perfectly linear fashion. No flashbacks, no time jumps, no confusing timelines. Just one camera, one day, one increasingly uncomfortable experience. But here's the genius. Even though the structure is simple, the emotional and psychological layers are anything but. Every time you think Josef is just lonely or maybe just a little weird, he does something that pushes the boundary further. A little too touchy, a little too manipulative. Then he starts revealing lies. Little things at first, stories that don't add up, emotional manipulation that feels just a bit rehearsed. And Aaron, like us, starts realizing this guy might not be what he claims to be. Then comes the first big turning point. Aaron decides to leave. He's had enough, as would any sane person. But Josef? He doesn't let go that easily. He starts following Aaron, leaving him gifts, sending him videos. He even breaks into his house. That's when the story shifts from awkward to downright horrifying. Now it's not just about Josef being creepy. It's about obsession, control, power. And this is where the film becomes more than just a weird found footage story. It becomes a psychological nightmare about boundaries being crossed and personal safety being stripped away, one layer at a time. The final stretch of the film is brilliantly executed. Josef lures Aaron to a park, supposedly for a peaceful resolution. He says he wants to explain everything, say goodbye, clear the air. And here's the most disturbing part. Aaron shows up. Why? Maybe he still wants to believe Josef isn't dangerous. Maybe he's curious. Maybe he's just too nice for his own good. But whatever the reason, he sits on that bench, facing away from the camera, completely exposed. And Josef? Well, let's just say he doesn't disappoint. What follows is sudden, silent, and shocking. No screaming. No dramatic music. Just one clean act of horror that seals Joseph's place as one of the creepiest characters in horror history. But even that's not the end. Oh no. Josef, ever the documentarian, adds Aaron's video to his growing collection. We see that Aaron wasn't the first, and probably won't be the last. The film ends on a note that's both darkly comic and deeply disturbing. Josef speaks to the camera like an artist admiring his work. It's personal to him. It's a pattern, and worst of all, it works. That's the real horror. Not the violence, not the jump scares, but the calm, calculated way he manipulates, charms, and destroys people, all while filming it like it's his life's masterpiece. So no, Creep doesn't follow a complex or nonlinear narrative. It doesn't play with time or alternate perspectives, but it doesn't need to. What makes it so powerful is how it builds suspense through personality, behavior, and psychological tension. It keeps things grounded, realistic, and incredibly intimate, which makes the horror feel way too real for comfort. And that's what makes Creep so unforgettable. It's not just a story. It's an experience, one that makes you question your instincts, your trust, and your safety, all from behind the lens of a simple handheld camera. Let's dive deep into the characters of Creep. And trust me, there are many of them. But the psychological depth packed into just two people is more than most big ensemble films ever achieve. In fact, one of the most fascinating things about Creep is how it manages to build such intense character development with such minimal ingredients. Two characters, one camera, one increasingly messed up day. That's it. But within that tiny setup is a full-blown psychological battle between fear and manipulation, trust and suspicion, kindness and deception. Let's start with Aaron, our guide, our lens, the guy behind the camera. He's the one we relate to. He's an everyman, quiet, polite, trying to make a bit of money by answering a vague Craigslist ad. He's not a hero. He's not a fighter. He's not even particularly brave. He's just a decent guy who finds himself in a situation that slowly gets stranger and stranger. And that's what makes his character work. From the start, Aaron feels real. He's awkward but curious. He's uncomfortable, but he sticks around. You can see him constantly assessing the situation, trying to decide if this is just a weird gig, or if he should be genuinely worried. His arc is subtle but powerful. He starts off open and trusting, maybe a little naive, but by the end he's worn down, rattled, and totally paranoid. His transformation is internal, from calm to anxious, from cautious to scared. And yet, despite everything, there's this lingering sense that he still wants to believe in the best in people. That maybe, just maybe, Josef isn't as dangerous as he seems. That hope, that sliver of human empathy, is what makes Aaron so compelling and what ultimately puts him in danger. Now let's talk about Josef, the reason we're all here. What a character. On the surface, he's warm, quirky, even funny. He opens the door with a huge smile. He gives big hugs. He shares emotional stories about his dying wish and his unborn son. He seems vulnerable. He cries. He apologizes when he makes things weird. But then the cracks start to show. The hugs last a little too long. The stories don't quite add up. He starts testing Aaron's boundaries emotionally and physically, like a cat toying with its prey. And that's when you realize this guy isn't just socially awkward. He's dangerous. But here's the real genius. Josef doesn't go full-on villain until the very end. Up until that final moment, you're still questioning what his deal is. Is he mentally ill? Is he lonely? Is this some bizarre performance art? Or is he a full-fledged sociopath? Josef is not just a character. He's a master manipulator. He studies Aaron from the moment they meet. He mirrors his tone, his body language, his emotions. He tells stories that tug at your heartstrings and then flips them to reveal lies. He's constantly playing a game of emotional chess, always one move ahead. And the best part? He never drops the act completely. Even when he reveals how twisted he truly is, he keeps that same cheerful, friendly demeanor. It's bone-chilling. His character doesn't grow in the traditional sense. He doesn't evolve or change, but he reveals. Little by little, he peels back layers, exposing a deeply broken, cunning, and terrifying human being. And each layer he reveals makes the previous one even more disturbing in hindsight. The relationship between Aaron and Josef is the heartbeat of the film. It starts off simple, employer and employee, but quickly turns into something far more psychological. Josef wants control. He wants connection, but on his own disturbing terms. Aaron wants to understand. He's sympathetic, but wary. What begins as an awkward partnership turns into a psychological tug-of-war. Josef pushes boundaries and Aaron resists, but not always enough. Every interaction between them is laced with tension, confusion, and this bizarre mix of friendliness and fear. It's like watching a spider slowly wrapping its web around an unsuspecting fly, and Aaron doesn't even realize it until it's too late. What makes their dynamic even more haunting is how normal it all seems at first. Josef doesn't scream or threaten. He talks, he listens, he shares, but all of it is calculated. His charm is a weapon. His stories are bait. And Aaron, being the kind of guy who doesn't want to seem rude or judgmental, keeps giving him the benefit of the doubt. It's not until Josef completely violates that fragile trust that Aaron finally sees the full picture, and by then, he's already caught in the trap. There's also a fascinating commentary here about vulnerability, performance, and how easily people can be manipulated when they want to see the good in others. Both Aaron and Josef are, in their own ways, performing. Aaron performs politeness, even when he's clearly uncomfortable. Josef performs empathy and warmth, hiding the predator underneath. Their interactions are like a psychological dance, and as the film goes on, you can see that Josef is always leading, always nudging Aaron closer to the edge. So while Creep might not have a large cast or flashy character arcs, what it does have is two of the most intensely developed and disturbingly believable characters in modern horror. One is a regular guy pushed to the brink of paranoia. The other is a smiling mask over something much darker. And together, they create a story that is as fascinating as it is terrifying. Watching their relationship unfold is like watching a slow-motion car crash. You can't look away, even as it gets more uncomfortable by the second. Let's talk performances in Creep. And oh boy, this is where the film truly earns its title. We're not just watching a scary story unfold. We're watching two actors fully become their characters in a way that feels so real, so raw, so uncomfortably close, you start forgetting you're watching a movie at all. And the wild part? There are basically only two people in the entire film. That's right, too. Mark Duplass and Patrick Brice. And they carry the whole thing like a psychological horror ballet where every look, every pause, every fake smile matters. Let's start with the man who steals the show, Mark Duplass as Josef. Now, if you've seen Duplass in other roles, you probably think of him as the friendly, quirky guy in indie dramas or comedies. But in Creep, he takes all that likability, all that charisma, and twists it into something absolutely sinister. His performance is terrifying not because he's shouting or snarling. No, Josef is dangerous because he's calm, cheerful, overly friendly. He talks like your goofy neighbor. He gives hugs like he's known you for years, and he cries at the drop of a hat. But behind all of that is a darkness you can't quite place, and that's exactly why it works. Duplass walks this razor-thin line between hilarious and horrifying. One second you're laughing at his awkward energy, and the next second you're asking yourself, wait, should I be scared right now? And the answer is yes. Always yes. The brilliance of Duplass' performance is in how natural it feels. You can't tell when he's acting as Josef, or when Josef is acting within the story. It's layered. Josef is a man constantly putting on different faces, using charm, pity, vulnerability, even humor as tools to manipulate. And Duplass sells every single one of those shifts with complete believability. There's a scene where he tells an emotional story about a bathtub and his mother. It sounds heartfelt, sad even, but there's this flicker in his eyes, this tiny glimmer of satisfaction as he watches Aaron react. That's the moment you realize this guy is enjoying the performance. And Duplass captures that twisted joy so well, it'll make your skin crawl. Then there's the peach fuzz scene. Yes, the wolf mask. If you've seen it, you know. If you haven't, buckle up. Watching Duplass dance in that mask, singing a bizarre song, laughing and spinning like a maniac. It's horrifying and hilarious at the same time. And it's not just what he's doing, it's how he does it. He commits. Completely. No wink to the camera. No half-hearted attempt. He is Josef, and Josef is fully unhinged. That level of commitment is what elevates the film from quirky indie horror to psychological masterpiece. You never feel like Duplass is acting. You feel like you're watching someone genuinely spiral in front of you, and it's chilling. On the flip side, Patrick Brice, who also directed the film, plays Aaron, and his performance is just as important, even if it's more understated. Aaron isn't a big personality. He's not cracking jokes or delivering long monologues. He's reacting, observing, trying to stay polite while clearly growing more and more uncomfortable. And that's exactly what makes him the perfect balance to Josef. Brice gives Aaron this natural, unassuming presence. He's not dumb, but he's not confrontational. He's the kind of guy who doesn't want to be rude, even when things are getting scary. And wow, does that hit home for anyone who's ever been in a weird situation and didn't know how to say, "Hey, this is too much." Brice's performance is all in the body language, the small moments, the tight smiles, the nervous glances, the way his voice subtly changes from curious to cautious. You can see the wheels turning in his head as Josef pushes things further and further. He plays Aaron with just the right amount of naivety and unease, enough that you understand his choices, but also yell at the screen wondering why he hasn't run away yet. It's a very delicate tightrope, and Brice walks it perfectly. And let's not forget, these two aren't just acting. They're improvising. That's right. Most of the dialogue in Creep was unscripted, which means every moment of tension, every bizarre story, every awkward silence, it was all created in the moment, with the actors reacting to each other in real time. That kind of improvisational performance requires insane chemistry, and luckily, Duplass and Brice have it in spades. Their back and forth feels alive, unpredictable. It's like watching two people try to figure each other out in real time. One trying to connect, the other trying to manipulate. And here's the thing. There are no other characters to distract us. No background extras. No phone calls from a friend warning Aaron to get out. It's just these two isolated in a cabin with a camera and a slowly unraveling conversation. That's what makes the performances so crucial. There's nowhere to hide. The entire movie rests on their shoulders, and they absolutely carry it. Not with big speeches or dramatic showdowns, but with subtle shifts in energy, eerie, quiet moments, and tension you can cut with a knife. So if you're watching Creep, pay close attention to the performances. They're not just good, they're surgical. Every moment, every glance, every awkward pause is crafted to keep you guessing. Are we watching a tragedy? A comedy? A murder? The answer is yes. All of it. Because Mark Duplass and Patrick Brice don't just act. They trap you in their twisted little world, and by the time you want to escape, it's already too late. Let's talk direction, because Creep isn't just a weird, unsettling little horror gem. It's a masterclass in what a filmmaker can pull off with next to nothing but pure nerve and smart choices. Patrick Brice, who not only acts in the film but also directs it, grabs the horror genre by the collar and says, "What if I made you deeply uncomfortable without any blood, jump scares, or special effects?" And then he does it by leaning into every awkward pause, every shaky camera moment, and every bit of psychological unease, like a filmmaker who knows exactly what buttons to press and when to press them. From the very first shot, Brice sets the tone. It's casual. It's quiet. It feels like some random guy filming a gig for Craigslist, because that's literally what it is. But behind that lo-fi realism is a carefully constructed sense of dread that starts small and tightens like a noose. The film doesn't shout horror at you. It whispers it. It smiles at you while inching closer with a knife behind its back. That tone, that balance of casual weirdness and creeping dread, is Brice's signature move here. He builds tension by doing less, not more. The silences are longer. The camera holds on faces just a few seconds too long. You're never quite sure if you're watching a funny indie film about an awkward friendship or the slow unraveling of a man's sanity. Brice doesn't just direct the story, he lives inside it. Remember, this is a found footage film, so everything we see is technically being filmed by Aaron, the character Brice is playing. That adds a whole other layer to the direction. He's not only making decisions about where to put the camera or how to pace the scenes, he's also performing while doing it. And yet, it all feels incredibly natural. The camera never feels like it's trying to show off. It's raw, shaky, unpolished, but intentionally so. That roughness makes the film feel real, like you stumbled onto someone's personal footage of a nightmare slowly unfolding. The realism pulls you in, and once you're in, Brice never lets go. The pacing is another brilliant choice. Creep doesn't rush. It lets the unease simmer. The first half of the movie almost tricks you into thinking this might just be a quirky, slightly uncomfortable buddy comedy. Josef's weird, sure, but maybe he's just lonely and socially off. Maybe he just overshares. Maybe he's harmless. And Brice lets you marinate in that uncertainty. He lets the audience get just comfortable enough to relax, and then he starts twisting the knife. It's the kind of direction that relies not on action, but on reaction. He knows the horror is in the space between the big moments, the long silences, the awkward eye contact, the questions that don't get answered. Stylistically, there's nothing flashy here, and that's the genius of it. Brice doesn't use dramatic lighting or over-the-top effects. He uses normalcy as his weapon. Everything looks and feels so grounded that when things start to spiral, you feel like it could happen to you. And then there's the brilliance of containment. Almost the entire film takes place in a cabin in the woods, a cliché setting, sure, but used in a completely fresh way. It's not about monsters or ghosts or cursed objects. It's about what happens when one person decides to mess with another, and how terrifying it can be when you're not sure if someone is joking or seriously unstable. Brice uses the small space to maximum effect. There's nowhere to hide, nowhere for the camera to go, so every scene feels intensely intimate. It's you, Josef, and the creeping realization that this guy is not okay. One of the boldest directional choices Brice makes is how he blends tone. This movie is funny, but not in a laugh-out-loud kind of way. It's funny in the, oh no, this guy is so weird, but I don't want to be rude kind of way. And that humor never undercuts the tension. It adds to it. You find yourself laughing and then immediately feeling guilty or anxious because something just doesn't feel right. That tonal tightrope, mixing awkward comedy with genuine fear, is incredibly hard to pull off, but Brice balances it perfectly. It's like being stuck in a conversation you want to escape, but the other person won't stop smiling. And then there's the final act. No spoilers, but let's just say Brice pulls off a sequence that is simultaneously simple, devastating, and absolutely unforgettable. He doesn't rely on gore or jump scares. He just uses framing, silence, and trust, and then breaks that trust in the most devastating way. It's haunting because it's so quiet, so controlled, so brutally honest. And that's the power of Brice's direction. He never loses control, even when the characters do. So while Creep might seem small and simple on the surface, the direction is anything but. Patrick Brice takes a micro-budget, a handheld camera, and one very charismatic psychopath, and creates a masterclass in minimalistic horror. His choices aren't about flash, they're about feeling. And every moment you spend watching this film, you're not just seeing a story unfold. You're feeling your skin crawl, your trust erode, and your curiosity turn into dread. That's not just good direction. That's psychological warfare, and Brice plays it like a pro. Let's talk cinematography in Creep. And before you roll your eyes and think, what cinematography? Isn't this just a found footage movie? Hang on, because what Patrick Brice does with the camera here is not only clever, it's crucial to the whole unsettling vibe of the film. Sure, it's shot like a DIY Craigslist documentary, but that's the trick. The homemade look isn't lazy, it's intentional. The cinematography doesn't want to impress you with sweeping drone shots or perfect lighting. It wants to make you squirm. And oh, it absolutely delivers. First off, let's address the elephant in the room. Yes, this is a found footage film, but not in the chaotic, run through the woods while screaming kind of way. The camera here isn't being whipped around in the middle of a ghost hunt. It's calm, it's polite, it's stable, It's Aaron's camera, and Aaron is trying to be professional. He's filming a gig, after all. So the cinematography mirrors his intentions. It starts off clean and deliberate, framed like someone just trying to get good shots for a documentary. That's the first trick. The camera builds trust. It lulls you into thinking this is a safe, stable space. But then things get weird, and suddenly that stillness turns sinister. The exact same angles that once felt neutral now feel threatening. The camera doesn't move, but you do, emotionally. And that shift is where the brilliance lies. Lighting is another sneaky weapon in Creep's cinematographic arsenal. Most of the movie is lit like real life, not movie life. No dramatic spotlights. No color filters to tell you this is scary now. It's all natural light, household bulbs, early morning haze, and dim cabins. And because it looks so normal, your brain doesn't put up its horror defenses right away. You don't get the visual cues that usually scream, get ready to be scared. But then you realize, wait, I am scared. And that's because the lighting isn't announcing the horror. It's hiding it in plain sight. That dim hallway, that slightly too dark forest path, that shadow in the corner of the frame. It all feels like things you might actually see, which somehow makes them more terrifying. When Josef disappears into darkness and the camera just sits there, watching, waiting, you feel every second. You feel the emptiness, the silence, the possibility. Let's talk framing. Oh, the framing. It's subtle, but so smart. Brice knows how to keep things just off kilter. Characters are often framed slightly too close. Their faces dominate the screen, filling up the shot in a way that feels uncomfortably intimate. Josef, especially, loves to get right up in that lens. And when he does, you don't just see his face, you feel his breath, his eyes, his invasive energy. The camera becomes a character. It's not just observing, it's participating. When Aaron leaves the camera on while he goes to sleep, or when he forgets it's recording, that's when some of the most unsettling moments sneak in. A figure standing in the doorway, a sound off camera, a frame that looks empty until you realize there's something in the background. It's not flashy. It's not screaming for attention, but it's there, and it's wrong. One of the most genius visual choices in Creep is how often the camera lingers. Brice doesn't cut away fast. He lets shots breathe. He lets them stretch out until you start begging for something to happen, or for something not to happen. That bathroom scene, the tub, the mask, all of it plays out in long, uncomfortable takes. No fancy editing, just the camera sitting there, silently judging you while you try to process what you're seeing. It's like being trapped in the room with these characters, and the camera is the only witness, but it won't help you. It just watches. That stillness becomes its own kind of horror. There's a quiet shot of Josef standing perfectly still in a doorway, just watching Aaron sleep. It's grainy, distant, almost too dark to see. But it's real. It's happening. And the fact that it's not stylized, that it looks like something you might catch on your own home camera, is what makes it so disturbing. And then there's the mask. Oh, Peach Fuzz. The wolf mask scene might be the strangest, most visually arresting moment in the film. It's absurd. It's surreal. Josef puts on this goofy-looking mask, and suddenly the tone snaps in half. The lighting is low. The camera is close. And this grown man starts dancing in a wolf mask, singing a weird tune, staring directly into the lens. It's terrifying and hilarious and deeply, deeply uncomfortable. The cinematography doesn't flinch. It holds the moment. It forces you to experience it in full. There's no escape. Creep doesn't rely on classic visual tricks to unsettle you. It doesn't need a moody blue color grade or hyper-stylized tracking shots. Instead, it uses the absence of those things to create realism. And in that realism, it finds horror. The cinematography is restrained on the surface, but behind that restraint is a master-level understanding of tension. Every frame is a slow burn. Every shadow is a potential threat. Every too-close shot of Josef's smiling face is a reminder that the scariest things aren't hiding in the dark. Sometimes they're sitting right in front of you, holding the camera, asking you to trust them, and watching your every move. editing, and pacing in Creep are like a quiet guest at a dinner party who doesn't say much at first, but by the end of the night you realize they were pulling all the strings. This isn't a film that rushes to the action or bombards you with rapid-fire cuts and flashy transitions. Nope. It's patient. It's sneaky. And that patience is what makes the experience so incredibly tense and weirdly addictive. Right from the start, the film sets a rhythm that feels relaxed, almost casual. Aaron shows up with his camera, films some B-roll, makes small talk with Josef, and the whole thing feels like it might just be a quirky slice of life doc. But underneath that laid-back surface, the editing is laying traps, shaping a rhythm that quietly gets under your skin. Patrick Brice, who not only directs and stars but also had a hand in the editing, understands the golden rule of psychological horror. Less is more, and timing is everything. He doesn't cut just to keep things moving. He cuts when it matters. When you're watching Creep, the transitions between scenes don't call attention to themselves. There's no dramatic fade to black, no overdone musical cues to shift you from one emotional beat to the next. Instead, scenes bleed into each other in a way that feels natural, almost documentary style. And that's the trick. It's supposed to feel like real life, like you're just tagging along for the ride. But that seamlessness, that's not accidental. That's calculated. Every edit is placed to maintain tension, not just momentum. Sometimes scenes will linger a little too long. A goodbye wave that should have ended 3 seconds ago stays on screen. A silent moment in the woods where you keep expecting a jump scare, only it never comes. These editing choices build dread through denial. You expect a release of tension, but the movie refuses to give it to you. And then when things finally do escalate, the cuts become just a hair quicker, the rhythm shifts slightly, and suddenly you're clinging to the edges of these awkward moments like they're horror grenades waiting to go off. The pacing in Creep plays a psychological game. The first half of the film is deceptively slow, not in a boring way, but in a why do I feel like something awful is coming even though everything is quiet right now kind of way. It draws you in with this strange, almost comedic awkwardness, and just when you think nothing significant is happening, the movie throws you one deeply unsettling moment that recontextualizes everything before it. And the editing knows exactly how to handle that shift. The tone doesn't change suddenly. It pivots just slightly, enough for you to feel it in your gut. One cut, one pause, one eerie silence, and suddenly that funny moment you just watched feels completely sinister in hindsight. One of the best things about the editing is how it never gets in the way. It's invisible but essential. Because it's a found footage movie, the idea is that what we're watching is a collection of unbroken takes or long stretches of raw footage. But within that rawness, the editing team manages to craft a tight, suspenseful rhythm. There's no fluff here. No unnecessary subplots. No drawn-out exposition. Just a tight, 77-minute experience that knows exactly what it's doing with every beat. Even when a scene seems quiet or uneventful, the editing is subtly controlling your emotional temperature, lowering it just enough so that the next freaky thing that happens hits like a punch to the gut. There are also brilliant uses of non-editing, scenes where the camera doesn't cut away when it normally would. Josef telling a story, Aaron filming in silence, a door left open just long enough to feel wrong. These moments stretch out just a bit past comfort. And that's where the tension thrives. The pacing never lets you get too comfortable. Even when things slow down, you feel the undertow pulling you toward something darker. It's like watching a horror film where the real terror is in what isn't being shown or isn't being cut. Every beat, every silence, every long stare is carefully timed to keep you off balance. The film builds toward a finale that's all about timing. The final sequence, in particular, is a masterclass in minimalist tension. One fixed camera, a man on a bench, silence, stillness, and then bam, a single moment delivered with perfect timing that lands like a freight train. The pacing leads you there step by step, lulling you into a false sense of detachment, and then it drops the hammer. And the fact that you knew something was coming, that the movie had been teasing it for so long, and it still works, that's the power of its editing. It's not about surprise. It's about dread, inevitability, and emotional precision. So, while Creep may feel simple on the surface, its editing and pacing are finely tuned machines built to mess with your mind. The transitions are invisible but impactful. The silences are loud. The pauses are painful. And the slow, deliberate rhythm of the film is what turns a strange little home video into a full-on psychological nightmare. It doesn't race. It stalks. And the edit is the sharp knife hidden in its hand the whole time. Alright, let's talk about the soundtrack and score of Creep, or more specifically, the deliciously creepy absence of one. Because here's the twist, this movie doesn't come at you with a full-blown orchestral soundtrack. There's no swelling strings to warn you something terrifying is about to happen. No bass drops to telegraph a jump scare. Nope. Creep is like that quiet kid in class who doesn't say a word all semester, and then suddenly delivers the most unhinged speech during presentation day. It's all about subtlety. Subtlety and silence. And the silence? That's where this movie really sings. Now don't get me wrong, there is music in Creep. But it's used sparingly, almost surgically. The film doesn't lean on its score to manufacture tension. Instead, it lets the natural sounds, footsteps on gravel, doors creaking, the hum of a camera mic, do most of the heavy lifting. And this approach works beautifully, because the quiet amplifies every single tiny sound. A twig snapping in the woods? Suddenly it sounds like a gunshot. A knock on the door? Feels like a bomb went off. In the absence of music, your ears start working overtime. You become hyper-aware of every rustle, every breath, every footstep. And when there is a sudden burst of sound, it hits like a punch to the chest. One of the most iconic auditory elements of the movie isn't even a piece of music. It's Josef's little theme song, Peach Fuzz. Oh yes, the wolf mask scene. If you've seen it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That weird little tune he sings while wearing a dollar store werewolf mask isn't just a random creepy moment. It's a sonic motif. It's goofy and strange on the surface, but it burrows into your brain like a parasite. It's the kind of sound that starts out funny, but the more you hear it, the more disturbing it becomes. It's playful, but also kind of off-key, like it doesn't quite belong in this reality. That one song tells you everything you need to know about Josef. He's disarming, he's bizarre, and underneath all the silliness, there's something deeply wrong. That tune becomes a twisted lullaby, a sonic warning sign. The most brilliant move the film makes is letting silence take center stage. Silence is a character in Creep. It's not just the space between dialogue, it's a weapon. Whole scenes are drenched in silence, where you can hear the air in the room, the distant sounds of nature, or the unsettling nothingness that seems to stretch on forever. And in that silence, your brain starts to fill in the blanks. You begin to imagine things that aren't even there. It's like the film dares you to listen harder, to anticipate something horrible just beyond the edge of the frame. And that dread, that anticipation, it's a kind of music all its own. There's also a brilliant use of diegetic sound, the sounds that come from within the world of the film. Because everything's being recorded on Aaron's camera, the audio feels raw and immediate. There's no polished studio shine here. It's messy, real, and intimate. You hear Josef's breathing when he gets too close. You hear Aaron shuffling in bed when he's trying to sleep. These aren't sounds you'd normally focus on, but in Creep, they become part of the score. There's a moment when Aaron's filming himself, alone and scared, and the only sound is the soft static of the recording. That static becomes a heartbeat. It becomes tension. And when something finally does break the silence, it explodes. When the film does bring in music, and it does here and there, it's never overbearing. It's like a whisper behind you in an empty room. It's low, it's eerie, and it creeps in when you least expect it. These moments are rare but effective. A subtle drone during a scene of paranoia. A dissonant tone when something shifts from awkward to dangerous. The score doesn't announce itself, it haunts. You feel it more than you hear it. And that's what makes it so effective. It doesn't tell you how to feel. It lets the dread sneak up on you, wrap around your spine, and whisper something's not right. By keeping the musical presence minimal and strategic, Creep avoids the pitfall of overscoring the horror. There's no manipulation. No dramatic cues shouting, "Be scared now." Instead, the film trusts the power of silence, discomfort, and subtle sound design to pull you deeper into the unease. It understands that the scariest noise is often no noise at all. That empty hallway, that crack of a branch outside the window, that moment when you realize you haven't heard anything for too long, that's the soundtrack of dread. So while Creep might not flood your ears with a traditional horror score, it doesn't need to. Its use of sound, or lack thereof, is what gives it its power. It's the cinematic equivalent of someone staring at you in silence for 5 minutes without blinking. You don't need a loud bang to feel unsettled. All you need is a quiet room, a man in a wolf mask, and a weird little song that plays in your head long after the credits roll. Creep may look like a bare-bones found-footage horror flick on the surface, but lurking beneath that stripped-down style is a buffet of psychological themes just waiting to crawl under your skin and whisper, "Trust no one." At its heart, this movie isn't just about a guy with a camera meeting a weirdo in the woods. It's about manipulation. It's about vulnerability. And it's about the terrifying gray area between kindness and danger. The whole movie operates like a twisted psychological experiment, where you, the viewer, get to play lab rat right alongside Aaron. Let's start with the big one. Asterisk, asterisk, trust, asterisk, asterisk. That theme is baked into every single frame of the film. The premise alone is designed to make you question people's intentions. Aaron agrees to film a dying man's last words for his unborn son. Seems noble, right? Heartwarming even. But that's the trick. That's the hook. Josef doesn't show up in a hockey mask with a chainsaw. He shows up with a sob story, an easy laugh, and a little bit of awkward charm. And we, like Aaron, want to believe him. The movie plays with this desire we all have, to give people the benefit of the doubt, to see the best in someone. And it uses that impulse to walk us straight into danger. Josef knows exactly how to use trust like a weapon. He disarms Aaron, not with threats, but with weird intimacy. With hugs, with stories, with a wolf mask, and a bizarre song that somehow makes him seem harmless. And every time Aaron lets his guard down, we squirm, because we know what's coming. Which brings us to another theme. Asterisk, asterisk, boundaries, asterisk, asterisk. Or more specifically, the way Creep explores how people can slowly erode them. Josef is the master of this. He doesn't leap across boundaries, he nudges. He shares a deeply personal story. And when Aaron seems uncomfortable, Josef pretends it was a joke. He's constantly probing, testing the waters, seeing how far he can push before Aaron pushes back. And when Aaron finally does set a boundary, Josef sidesteps it with charm, or pity, or manipulation. It's the horror version of gaslighting, where someone keeps telling you they're harmless, even while they do increasingly bizarre things. And it's uncomfortable, because we've all met people who make us feel guilty for being uncomfortable. The movie nails that dynamic with eerie precision. Then there's performance, as in the performance of identity. Both characters in the film are performing in some way. Aaron is performing professionalism, trying to keep his cool even when everything inside him is screaming that something is wrong. And Josef? He's a full-time actor, constantly slipping into different personas. He's a dying father, a lonely guy who wants a friend, a jokester, a victim, a predator. You never really know who he is because he never tells the same story twice. This fluid identity is a major theme. Creep asks, how well can you ever know someone? Especially when they're determined to keep shifting the mask. And it's not just a philosophical question, it's a threat. Because in this story, the inability to pin someone down becomes the very thing that makes them dangerous. We also get a heavy dose of isolation, both physical and emotional. The film takes place in a remote mountain town with no cell signal, no neighbors, and no safety net. But even more isolating is the emotional terrain. Aaron is alone in this situation, not just geographically, but mentally. He doesn't have anyone to check in with, no one to validate his instincts. And Josef uses that isolation to his advantage, slowly breaking Aaron down. It's a textbook manipulation tactic. Separate your target from the world and make them question their own reality. The horror here isn't just that Josef might hurt Aaron. It's that Josef is unraveling Aaron's sense of control, of truth, of self. And that hits on another deep theme. Asterisk, asterisk, control, asterisk, asterisk. Who has it, who loses it, and how fragile it really is. And here's the kicker. Creep never gives you clean answers. It doesn't spoon-feed its themes or spell out its message. It just plants the seeds and lets the tension grow. That's part of what makes the movie so effective. It trusts the audience to feel the discomfort and ask the questions later. Questions like, why do we give people second chances when they make us feel unsafe? Why are we so eager to dismiss red flags as social awkwardness? Why does being polite sometimes put us in danger? The film also toys with the idea of curiosity as a curse. Aaron is curious. He wants to believe the best. He wants to understand. And that curiosity is what Josef exploits. It's a theme that echoes through horror time and time again. Sometimes, wanting to know more is the worst possible instinct. And yet, we all share it. That's why we watch these movies. That's why Aaron keeps filming. That's why we can't look away. Ultimately, Creep is a quiet little nightmare about the monsters who don't look like monsters. The ones who smile, joke, and ask for a hug before they ruin your life. It explores the terrifying possibility that danger doesn't always scream. It whispers, it laughs, it shares a vulnerable story, and then waits. It's about trust, performance, isolation, and the slow erosion of safety masquerading as friendship. And the most chilling part? It all feels just real enough to happen. Let's talk about the visual effects and CGI in Creep. Or rather, let's talk about how Creep gives visual effects the cold shoulder and somehow becomes 10 times scarier because of it. This is a movie that doesn't bother with monsters leaping out of digital shadows or fancy rendered ghosts swirling through the air. There's no pixelated poltergeist or high-budget horror spectacle. What Creep does instead is lean all the way into its raw, lo-fi aesthetic, and that choice becomes its own kind of special effect. The entire film is shot like a home video gone terribly wrong, and this DIY approach doesn't just enhance the realism, it becomes the visual language of the film's horror. Every frame looks like it could have come from an actual camcorder someone bought off Craigslist. That's not a mistake. That's the point. The found footage style strips away all the polish. There's no smooth Steadicam gliding through dimly lit corridors here. It's jittery. It's awkward. The lighting is harsh and uneven. And that gritty, unfiltered look becomes the texture of fear itself. Because when you watch Creep, it doesn't feel like you're watching a horror movie. It feels like you've stumbled onto someone's private footage that you shouldn't be watching. And there's a visceral terror in that. It's not CGI. But it's definitely a visual strategy and it works like a charm. There's something brilliantly unnerving about how normal everything looks. The house is just a house. The woods are just woods. Even the scariest prop in the movie, good old Peach Fuzz the wolf mask, looks like something you'd find in a thrift store bargain bin. But in the context of this film, those mundane visuals become sinister. There's no need for blood geysers or glitchy demonic effects. Instead, you get a guy in a creepy costume, bathed in flickering bathroom light, dancing in slow, strange circles. And somehow, that moment burns into your brain far more than any digital effect ever could. Practicality is the name of the game here. If Creep uses any visual effects at all, they're completely invisible. There's no flashy monster transformations or CGI gore. It's all about implication and psychological suggestion. That locked front door? Scarier than any animated creature. That hallway where you thought you saw something move in the shadows? Far more unnerving than a green screen specter. The film trusts that your imagination, fueled by just the right amount of suggestion, will do the job better than any VFX team could. And when it comes to editing tricks and subtle shifts in visual tone, Creep plays it smart. Instead of jump scares driven by effects, it uses subtle timing, framing, and camera placement to make your skin crawl. A slow zoom into a doorway where nothing's happening? That's the stuff nightmares are made of. A character staring just a little too long at the camera without blinking? That's your monster right there, and it requires zero CGI to terrify. The film makes you paranoid about every inch of the screen, because if you blink, you might miss the moment when something just barely shifts, just enough to make your heart pound. There's also something to be said about how the movie plays with light and darkness, not through computerized lighting effects, but with what's available on set. Flashlights, natural daylight, the glow of a bathroom bulb. These simple sources become tools of tension. In one moment, a flashlight beam catches Josef in a way that makes his face look like a mask. In another, the flicker of light across a dark hallway makes you start inventing threats that may not even be there. The shadows are practical. The light is minimal. And your fear is completely earned. In a genre where so many horror films go all in on digital wizardry, Creep pulls off a different kind of magic. It strips everything down to the bones, then asks the audience to meet it halfway. No fireballs, no explosions, just a man, a mask, and a camera. The visual effects here aren't about spectacle, they're about the slow burn, the creeping dread, the sense that something is off, even if you can't point to it. And that, in its own way, is a masterclass in visual horror without ever needing a drop of CGI. Let's dive into the eerie, unsettling world of Creep. A world that looks like it could be your neighbor's weekend cabin, your uncle's guest bathroom, or your own driveway. That's what makes the set design and locations in this film so sneaky and so smart. Because Creep doesn't use elaborate sets or overly stylized backdrops to build its horror. Instead, it uses familiarity as a trap. The whole setting feels so ordinary, so mundane, that when things start getting weird, it feels like your reality is what's being distorted. The cabin in the woods setting has been used in horror 1,000 times before, but Creep flips it on its head. There are no thunderclaps, no cobweb-draped chandeliers, no creaky staircases leading to cursed basements. What you get is a modern mountain home that feels lived in but not flashy. A place that looks like someone might Airbnb it when they need to unplug for a weekend. It's cozy but isolated, nestled deep enough in the trees that you know no one's coming if you scream. And that balance between comfort and claustrophobia is the film's secret weapon. The house feels like a place you could relax in, until the door won't open, or until your host starts talking about a wolf mask named Peach Fuzz. Then suddenly, those plain white walls feel like they're closing in. Every inch of the location is used to crank up the tension. The front porch becomes a place of false welcomes. The bathroom, yes, the bathroom, becomes the stage for one of the most bizarre and creepy moments in the film. The narrow hallways, the cluttered kitchen, the woods surrounding the property, they're all real, grounded, and unnervingly normal. And that realism is what hooks you. You're not watching some fantastical haunted mansion. You're watching a guy with a camera walk through rooms that feel uncomfortably similar to places you've been before. Let's not forget the role of the woods themselves. The trees are tall, the air is quiet, and there's no signal. Classic isolation setup? Sure. But again, Creep doesn't go for spooky fog or ominous animal noises. The forest is still and beautiful in the way real woods are. It feels peaceful until it doesn't. And that's when the silence starts to get loud. When every crack of a twig or distant rustle feels like a red flag. The woods don't need to be haunted, they just need to be empty. And the emptiness is what makes them terrifying. Props are minimal but disturbingly effective. A stuffed animal becomes a storytelling device. A tub of VHS tapes becomes a psychological landmine. And of course, there's the Peach Fuzz mask, equal parts goofy and deeply disturbing. That one prop tells you everything you need to know about the movie's tone. It looks ridiculous at first glance, but the longer you stare at it, the more your skin crawls. It's not about the complexity of the object, it's about the context, the energy, and the way it's used. That mask could have come from a dollar store. But in the world of Creep, it becomes a symbol of something far more sinister. The production design does something really bold. It refuses to embellish. It doesn't want to wow you with visual grandeur. It wants to lull you into a sense of security and then quietly pull the rug out from under you. The camera lingers on everyday details, the faucet running, the curtains swaying, a stack of firewood by the door. These details are so normal that when something finally isn't normal, it hits you hard. The house doesn't scream horror. It whispers it slowly and only once you're already deep inside. What's brilliant is how the environment mirrors the emotional tone of the film. At first, everything looks a little awkward, but harmless. Then it starts to feel off-kilter, like something's not quite right with the furniture placement or the way the shadows stretch across the room. By the end, every corner of the house feels tainted. The same walls you saw in the beginning now feel suffocating. Nothing has physically changed, but your entire perception has shifted, and that's masterful set design at work. Backslash asterisk creep backslash asterisk doesn't need sprawling sets or million-dollar backdrops. It uses the power of suggestion, the menace of simplicity, and the discomfort of everyday locations to build a world that feels disturbingly close to our own. And when the horror starts to unfold, you realize that the scariest part isn't what's hiding in the shadows. It's that this place, this house, these woods, they were never meant to feel dangerous. But now they do. Forever. Let's talk about the dialogue and script in Creep, a film that somehow turns awkward small talk into a horror weapon. From the very first interaction, you get the sense that something is off. But the script never shows its hand too early. Instead, it plays a long, uncomfortable game with you, wrapping its weirdness in layers of friendly chatter, forced politeness, and just enough charm to keep you second-guessing your own instincts. The beauty of the writing in Creep is that it doesn't rely on over-the-top horror cliches or dramatic speeches. It thrives in the uncomfortable pauses, the clumsy laughs, and the moments where you realize someone is saying something just a little too intimate, a little too soon. What makes the dialogue so unnerving is how normal it sounds at first. Josef, played with unnerving sincerity by Mark Duplass, starts off sounding like your average offbeat guy trying to connect. He's chatty, overly friendly, maybe a little too touchy-feely. He shares personal stories way too early, asks awkward questions, and makes you wonder if he's just socially clueless or hiding something deeply unsettling. And the script walks that razor-thin line for an impressively long time. You're left watching these seemingly harmless exchanges spiral into something way more sinister, and it happens one casual sentence at a time. The conversations don't follow a neat structure. They meander. They feel improvised, and that's because much of the film actually was improvised, with a loose outline guiding the actors rather than a strict script. That spontaneity gives the dialogue a raw, unpredictable energy. You get lines that feel totally off the cuff, but also incredibly telling. Josef's stories, for example, especially the infamous bathtub scene, are deeply disturbing, but they're delivered in such a matter-of-fact tone that they almost don't register as creepy until you take a second to actually process what he just said. That's the genius of the writing. It creeps up on you. There are moments when Josef says something so casually bizarre, you don't know whether to laugh or run. Like when he offers an impromptu scare with the peach fuzz mask while singing a little song. On paper, it sounds ridiculous. In context, it's hilarious and terrifying in equal measure. Those moments work because the script isn't trying to be traditionally scary. It's trying to make you feel constantly unsure. It's horror through social discomfort, weaponized awkwardness, and the sense that you're stuck in a situation you can't easily exit. The back and forth between Josef and Aaron, the cameraman, is also fascinating. Aaron doesn't say much, and that's intentional. He represents the audience, curious, polite, cautious. His reactions are subtle, restrained, and often filled with the kind of "I don't want to be rude," but hesitation that makes his silence just as important as Josef's monologues. The script gives Josef all the verbal firepower, and Aaron becomes the quiet observer, letting the audience feel the tension mount without a word needing to be said. This lopsided dialogue dynamic makes every sentence Josef utters feel more loaded, more dangerous. And then there's the way the film uses language to manipulate trust. Josef constantly tries to reassure Aaron, and us, that everything's fine. He apologizes, he explains, he overshares in a way that feels like a desperate plea for understanding. But underneath those words is something else entirely. The script uses repetition and contradictions to create doubt. 1 minute Josef is pouring his heart out, the next he's laughing it off. He tells you one story, then tells you another that contradicts it. The lies and truths blend together until you can't separate them, and that confusion becomes its own kind of fear. There aren't big, quotable lines like in a Tarantino film or sharp one-liners like in an action movie. Instead, Creep gives you phrases that echo because of their context. A simple line like, "I just wanted to be close to you," hits like a punch in the gut by the end of the film. A casual "can I ask you something" suddenly feels like a trap. And when silence takes over, when the words stop, You realize just how much power the dialogue had been holding up to that moment. In Creep, the script doesn't scream horror. It whispers it in your ear while smiling too wide. It hides its menace in casual conversation, in awkward humor, in the kind of talk that feels harmless until it's not. The genius of the writing is that it feels real, improvised, and innocent. And that's exactly why it's so chilling. Because when horror sounds like your neighbor making small talk, you know you're in trouble. Let's get one thing straight. Creep is not your typical horror movie. It doesn't come flying at you with jump scares every 5 minutes. There's no haunted house with creaky doors, no vengeful spirits whispering in the dark, no chainsaws or blood-splattered walls. Instead, it tiptoes into your brain wearing a friendly smile and then slowly starts rearranging the furniture in your mind. This is psychological horror, disguised as a casual visit to a stranger's house, and it absolutely loves messing with your expectations. If you're coming in hoping for a traditional scarefest, you're in for something weirder, quieter, and way more personal. What makes Creep such a fascinating entry in the horror genre is how brilliantly it subverts nearly every convention it touches. First off, it's a found footage film, but not the shaky, chaos-filled kind that became a trend after the Blair Witch Project. This one is calm, slow-burning, and meticulously awkward. It uses the format to create intimacy instead of hysteria. The camera isn't running because someone's trying to survive a night of chaos. It's running because a guy just wanted to earn some quick cash filming a dying man's day. And that's what makes it brilliant. The mundane setup lulls you into thinking this is going to be a character drama. And then Josef starts telling stories about his imaginary son, and things start spiraling into something darker. But it all happens without big genre flags waving in your face. It sneaks in sideways. The horror here doesn't rely on gore or supernatural monsters. The terror comes from the unpredictability of human behavior. Josef, the smiling, oversharing, bath-loving oddball, feels like someone you might meet in real life. Just eccentric enough to be believable, just erratic enough to keep you nervous. That unpredictability replaces the usual monster around the corner tension with, what is this guy going to say or do next? And let's be honest, that's scarier. You don't know when the line will be crossed, because the script keeps redefining what's okay and what's not with every passing scene. That's genre tension turned inside out. The film also dabbles in dark comedy, but it does it with such subtlety that you almost feel guilty for laughing. Like, should you be chuckling at this guy dancing around in a wolf mask named Peach Fuzz? Is it funny or horrifying? Or both? That balance between humor and horror is razor sharp. It doesn't make fun of the genre, but it definitely nudges it, winks at it, and dares you to relax, right before it pulls the rug out from under you. The discomfort becomes the playground. It's the kind of horror where the silence, the pauses, and the oversharing are the punchlines. But none of it feels gimmicky, and that's what keeps the film grounded even as it drifts into seriously creepy territory. Instead of following horror rules, Creep rewrites them with a Sharpie and dares you to find the edits. The jump scares, when they do come, are startling not because they're loud or sudden, but because the buildup is so laced with dread that even the smallest movement becomes explosive. The horror lives in the space between what's said and what's meant, between the polite laughter and the nervous silence. It's like a social interaction that slowly turns into a nightmare you can't wake up from. Also, in a genre filled with ensemble casts and multiple storylines, Creep boldly keeps things tight. 2 characters, 1 location. 90% of the runtime is just watching one man try to be polite while another man slowly unravels every social norm imaginable. That claustrophobic simplicity turns genre expectations on their head. No subplots, no false leads, no haunted backstory involving cursed objects or demonic rituals. Just a man, a camera, and an increasingly uncomfortable situation. And let's talk about that ending. Without spoiling anything, it delivers one of the boldest mic drop moments in modern horror. It doesn't go for spectacle. It goes for stillness, for silence, for something that sticks in your chest long after the credits roll. And that's where Creep fully leans into its own genre-defying identity. It doesn't want to scare you with monsters. It wants to remind you that the real monsters are the ones who smile too much, who hug too tightly, and who overshare just a little too soon. Creep takes the horror genre, strips it down to its most basic parts, and then reconstructs it with the precision of a sociopath building a friendly trap. It uses realism to unsettle, awkwardness to disarm, and minimalism to suffocate. And in doing so, it pulls off something rare, a horror experience that feels entirely new, even though it barely raises its voice. Creep may not walk into the room holding a big neon sign that says social commentary ahead, but trust me, it's absolutely poking at some of our most uncomfortable cultural nerves. On the surface, it's a psychological horror film about one man being hired by another to film a personal video. But lurking beneath all that weirdness is a disturbingly sharp critique of modern-day trust, social boundaries, and our obsession with politeness in the face of danger. It's like the film is quietly whispering, "Hey, isn't it kind of messed up how far we'll go to avoid being rude, even when our gut is screaming that something is terribly wrong?" Let's start with the big one, the social contract. Aaron, the protagonist, is clearly uncomfortable with Joseph's behavior pretty early on. The overfamiliar stories, the unsolicited hugs, the strange moments of vulnerability, they all feel like red flags waving in slow motion. But Aaron doesn't leave. Why? Because he doesn't want to be rude. He's been conditioned, like most of us, to smile through discomfort, to give people the benefit of the doubt, to assume that weirdness is just eccentricity. That says something huge about the way modern society deals with threat, especially the kind that hides behind charm. It's not a chainsaw-wielding maniac breaking into your house. It's a guy who bakes you pancakes and tells you he's just lonely. And that disarming approach reflects something very real about how we interact today, especially with strangers. There's a horror to that, one that Creep absolutely milks. Then there's the whole gig economy angle. Aaron is a freelancer. He's taking this job because he needs money. That's it. No background checks, no formal vetting, just a simple Craigslist ad and a camera. That quiet commentary on how people, especially creatives and independent workers, are sometimes forced into unsafe situations because of financial need is pretty sobering when you really think about it. The film doesn't beat you over the head with this idea, but it's baked right into the setup. The horror becomes even more real when you consider that there are people doing similar jobs every day, often alone, often with strangers, because that's what paying the bills looks like now. And let's talk about masculinity. Josef is a fascinating case study in male vulnerability turned inside out. He starts off performing this exaggerated version of emotional openness, crying, hugging, confessing childhood trauma, talking about fatherhood. But the way he uses it feels manipulative. It's weaponized vulnerability. He knows that if he acts broken and emotional, people are less likely to see him as dangerous. That's a chilling commentary on how emotional performance can be used to mask abusive intent, and it flips the typical idea of toxic masculinity on its head. Instead of being overtly aggressive or domineering, Josef plays the role of the gentle, emotional man, and uses that performance to disarm, confuse, and ultimately trap. At the same time, the film also critiques how unprepared most of us are to deal with people who don't follow social scripts. Josef constantly violates unspoken rules about personal space, honesty, and pacing in relationships. And because he's not being overtly aggressive, Aaron, and by extension, the viewer, struggles to react. It's a commentary on how our social systems rely on everyone playing along. When someone doesn't, it leaves us stunned, awkward, unsure. That's a huge part of the unease in Creep. It's not about what Josef does. It's about how out of sync his behavior is with what we expect from someone being friendly. That mismatch creates the dread. Even the found footage style ties into a cultural obsession, documenting everything. Why do we film our lives? To create connection? To feel less alone? To control the narrative? Creep plays with that idea, too. The camera becomes a stand-in for control, for safety, for a sense of reality. But in this case, it's an illusion. The more Aaron films, the deeper he falls into something he can't control at all. That's a clever little nod to our belief that recording something makes us safer or more in control. In Creep, the camera doesn't protect you, it watches you fall. And let's not forget the way the film deals with isolation and loneliness. Josef frames everything he does as a result of being alone. That's not just a personal character trait, it's a cultural reality. In an age where people are more connected digitally, but often lonelier than ever, Josef becomes a walking warning sign. He's what happens when isolation festers, when someone builds their own reality unchecked. And the idea that someone could turn their loneliness into a performance, a trap, a form of control, that's genuinely haunting. So no, Creep doesn't deliver its social commentary with a bullhorn. It doesn't need to. Instead, it wraps those ideas in small talk, awkward hugs, and offbeat humor and lets you stew in the implications. It's horror that reflects real-life anxieties about trust, safety, work, isolation, and the limits of politeness, and it does so by making you laugh, cringe, and squirm all at once. Watching Creep is like being on a very awkward first date that suddenly turns into a psychological game of survival. The engagement doesn't come from loud explosions or over-the-top drama. It sneaks in with an uncomfortable smile, lingers in the long pauses, and grows every time Josef tilts his head just a little too much. For the audience, this isn't a sit-back-and-relax horror experience. This is lean-forward, squirm-in-your-seat tension that grabs you not with spectacle, but with subtle, unrelenting discomfort. You're constantly on edge, not because you're scared of what will happen, but because you genuinely have no idea what kind of film this even is in the moment. Is this going to turn into a tragic friendship? Is it going to be a slow burn breakdown of a lonely man? Or is this guy going to kill someone with a kitchen utensil before the second act? There's a strange thrill in trying to figure out where the movie is going, because Creep isn't playing by the usual horror rules. That unpredictability hooks people in hard. Every time Josef opens his mouth, you're mentally bracing yourself. Will this be a heartfelt confession or a trap disguised as vulnerability? And let's be honest, that level of unpredictability is pure gold for audience engagement. It keeps you mentally on high alert, scanning for clues, overanalyzing every glance, every story, every weird bit of body language. It's not a passive watch. You feel like a detective trying to solve a crime that hasn't happened yet. Now let's talk about reactions. Creep absolutely excels at creating moments that make viewers physically react. The infamous bathtub scene, the first appearance of Peach Fuzz, the long awkward silences where you don't know if Josef is about to cry, scream, or lunge. These aren't cheap scares, they're deep, crawling moments that stick to your skin. You don't scream and forget. You gasp and remember. The shock doesn't come from volume or gore, but from how intensely personal and human it all feels. It's horrifying because it feels like something that could happen to you after answering the wrong ad online. That realism hits hard, and it's exactly why people talk about this movie long after watching it. This film also provokes deep reflection, especially on second viewing. The first time through, you're just trying to survive the discomfort. But watch it again, and suddenly, every word Josef says has a second meaning. Every smile looks like a threat. Every story sounds rehearsed. That's the kind of experience that pulls audiences back in for repeat viewings. You want to go back and spot the signs. You need to understand how you missed them the first time. And that's where the film shines, not just in the story it tells, but in how it makes you question your own instincts. Were you too trusting? Too polite? Too curious? The film also creates a weird kind of intimacy with the viewer. Because it's shot in found footage style, it feels like you are the one holding the camera. That adds a layer of personal responsibility to the experience. You're not just watching Aaron, you're with him. You're silently screaming at him to get out of that cabin, to stop trusting this overly friendly stranger, to turn off the camera and run. That emotional involvement makes everything feel higher stakes, and that emotional investment sticks with audiences well past the final scene. But perhaps the most brilliant trick Creep plays is how it invites discussion without even trying. Everyone who watches it comes away with questions. Who is Josef really? How much of what he said was true? Was he always planning what happened? And why did Aaron stay as long as he did? These aren't just plot questions, they're personal questions, because they force you to look at your own choices. What would you have done? Where would you have drawn the line? That kind of engagement is gold for horror fans and film nerds alike. It fuels debates, think pieces, and hours of late-night YouTube breakdowns. So no, Creep doesn't flood the screen with action or crowd-pleasing one-liners, but it resonates hard. It earns every flinch, every gasp, every shouted "don't go in there" from its audience. And it does it by treating the viewer not like a spectator, but like a participant. Watching Creep feels less like viewing a film and more like surviving an interaction. And that's the kind of engagement that keeps people talking long after the screen fades to black. Let's put Creep up against the creepy cousins at the horror genre's family dinner table and see who blinks first. At first glance, it might seem like the awkward, quiet one sitting in the corner with a camera bag and a nervous smile. But don't be fooled. This film has sharper teeth than it shows, and it stands out in a crowd that's often loud, gory, and bursting with jump scares. What makes Creep such a standout is that it takes the found footage horror subgenre, a space crowded with ghosts, shaky cams, and demonic possessions, and does something refreshingly different. It strips the gimmicks down to the bare bones. No ghosts, no haunted houses, just two guys, a camera, and the slow, uncomfortable realization that one of them is deeply, deeply unhinged. Now compare that to its closest relatives, like Paranormal Activity, The Blair Witch Project, or Wreck. Those films all lean into supernatural horror and external threats. You expect things to go bump in the night. You brace yourself for possessed dolls, ancient curses, or demonic forces. But Creep flips the script by saying, you know what's scarier than ghosts? A real person with no supernatural powers, just weird energy, questionable intentions, and no concept of personal boundaries. It's the realism that makes it so unnerving. While those other films rely on the fear of the unknown, Creep thrives on the fear of the too well-known. A man so familiar, so believable, that he could very easily exist in your neighborhood. Or worse, your inbox. Within the stranger danger niche of horror, you could line Creep up alongside films like The Gift, Funny Games, or even Misery. All of these movies deal with someone slowly invading the life of another character under the guise of friendliness or normalcy. But what Creep does differently is remove the polish. It's not a glossy psychological thriller with fancy lighting and sweeping orchestral scores. It's raw, stripped back, and disarmingly casual. That home video vibe gives it a documentary-like unease that the others lack. You feel like you're watching something you were never supposed to see, and that voyeuristic discomfort is part of the appeal. Now let's talk about Duplass himself. For fans of his work, seeing him go full tilt into deranged territory was like watching the quirky guy from your favorite indie comedy suddenly show up at your door in a wolf mask. He's known for heartfelt mumblecore dramas and sweetly awkward comedies, not psychological horror. But that's exactly why he's terrifying here. He brings that same offbeat improvisational charm into the performance and twists it into something that feels both real and totally off. He doesn't play Josef like a classic horror villain. He plays him like your overly friendly coworker who knows too much about your personal life and insists on hugs. And it works because we've all met someone like that, just not, hopefully, with a serial killer twist. In terms of storytelling structure, Creep also breaks from the horror tradition of sprawling ensembles and elaborate backstories. There's no exposition dump, no big lore reveal. It's just Aaron and Josef, and the horror comes not from what they explain, but from what they don't. This minimalist approach puts in a rare category with films like Coherence or The Invitation. Low budget, character-driven suspense that thrives on tension and ambiguity. It's not flashy, but it lingers in your head much longer than a monster reveal ever could. And if you stack Creep against its own sequel, Creep 2, you get an even better sense of how it defines itself. While the sequel gets a bit more meta and expands Josef's character, the first film is where the formula was invented. It's the raw, unfiltered version of the idea, where every moment feels uncertain and dangerous. That simplicity is its superpower. In a genre bloated with convoluted mythology and franchise fatigue, Creep stands tall by keeping things personal, unpredictable, and quietly horrifying. So while it may not have the budget or bombast of its horror peers, Creep earns its place by daring to be small, strange, and real. It doesn't need blood-splattered walls or demonic whispers to haunt you. It just needs a man with a camera, a smile that lasts a second too long, and a hug that feels like a trap. That's the kind of horror that doesn't end when the credits roll. It follows you home. Creep may look like a simple, stripped-down found footage horror flick, but beneath its awkward conversations and sketchy hugs is a surprisingly rich layer of symbolism and metaphor if you're brave enough to look it in the eyes. This isn't the kind of movie that waves its meaning around like a neon sign. No, Creep whispers in your ear with a smile and dares you to decode what it really means. Let's start with Josef himself. He isn't just a weird guy with poor boundaries. He's a living, breathing metaphor for manipulation in its most charming form. He represents how predators don't always show up as monsters. Sometimes they arrive with disarming friendliness, over-familiarity, and a tragic story that pulls you in before you even realize you're being cornered. Josef is a walking symbol of how dangerous it is to ignore red flags just because someone seems nice. His whole performance is a study in how easily politeness and empathy can be weaponized against us. And then there's the camera. Oh, that innocent little handheld lens that's present from beginning to end. It's not just a storytelling tool, it's a metaphor for control. Josef invites Aaron to film him, then slowly begins to control the narrative. Who's really behind the camera starts to shift, both literally and symbolically. The camera becomes a silent character, witnessing all the lies, half-truths, and psychological games. It represents perception, how we choose to see people, and how easily that view can be manipulated. And when the camera is turned off or worse, left running without consent, that's when the truth slips out. It's the metaphorical equivalent of saying, what do people do when they think no one is watching? Now let's talk about Peach Fuzz. Yes, the goofy wolf mask that would almost be funny if it didn't make you want to sprint in the opposite direction. That thing is not just a prop. It's pure symbolism. Peach Fuzz is the mask Josef wears literally and figuratively. It's a childlike disguise that lets him act out his darkest fantasies without taking emotional responsibility. When he puts it on, it's like flipping a switch. He becomes unrecognizable, detached, and fully immersed in his predator persona. The wolf costume isn't just a creepy costume. It's a metaphor for the wolf in sheep's clothing cliché. Josef presents himself as vulnerable, sad, even lovable. But when the mask goes on, the mask of civility comes off. It's a twisted visual cue that danger is no longer hiding. It's coming right for you. Even the title Creep plays into the metaphorical layers of the story. On the surface, it describes Josef, sure, but it also describes the feeling. The slow, creeping realization that something is very wrong. The creep of fear. The creep of doubt. The creep of danger inching closer, moment by moment, even while the characters pretend everything's okay. The entire narrative structure is built around the idea of creep as a process, not a jump. It's a steady slide into discomfort that mirrors how real-life danger often unfolds, quietly, incrementally, and masked by charm. The location, too, becomes symbolic. The isolated cabin in the woods is a classic horror trope, but here, it's not about supernatural evil lurking in the forest. It's about the slow erosion of safety. That place starts as a cozy getaway and ends up as a psychological prison. The isolation represents vulnerability. Not just physical, but emotional. Aaron is cut off from help, yes, but more importantly, he's cut off from rational judgment. There's no one to talk to, no outside voice of reason. And that silence becomes its own metaphor for how people can get trapped in manipulative relationships, slowly convinced that their unease is just paranoia. Even the editing style, with all its awkward pauses and seemingly meaningless shots, plays into the theme of hidden danger. Nothing feels polished or theatrical. Instead, the choppy, mundane footage feels like raw memory, like you're reviewing moments for signs you missed. That repetitive, lingering lens becomes symbolic of trauma replaying itself, over and over, trying to find the moment when it all went wrong. This is the kind of symbolism that doesn't announce itself. It creeps in, fittingly, like Josef behind a door you thought was locked. So while Creep may not dress itself up in artsy montage or layered monologues, don't be fooled. It's absolutely packed with metaphorical meaning. It's a cautionary tale dressed as a character study, a psychological mirror hidden behind a camera lens. It warns you to trust your instincts, to question charm, and to remember that sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones that don't look scary at all. Creep may be a compact little horror gem on its own, but believe it or not, it's the beginning of what has quietly become one of the most unsettling mini-franchises in modern horror. Yes, it has a sequel, Asterisk Creep 2 Asterisk. And yes, there's talk of a third film lurking just behind the curtain, sharpening its metaphorical knife. But before we dive into sequels, let's appreciate what this first installment really kicked off. Creep isn't just a standalone film. It's the launchpad for a character study that spans multiple psychological layers, all centered around one of the most bizarre and terrifying characters horror has given us in the last decade, Josef. Or is it Bill? Or maybe Aaron? The fact that we're still not sure what his real name is tells you exactly the kind of mystery this franchise is built on. As the first entry in the series, Creep lays the groundwork by setting up a structure that's surprisingly elastic. It's minimal, yes, just two people, a camera, and an escalating sense of dread. But that simplicity is a feature, not a bug. It means the film doesn't lock itself into elaborate backstory or convoluted mythology. Instead, it introduces a method, a formula, a ritual. One man pretending to be someone else, luring in another man with some fake story, and then using charm, manipulation, and eventually something far more sinister to get what he wants. It's a pattern that Creep 2 would explore further, but the seeds were planted right here, in this claustrophobic forest cabin. Now, when you look at the horror genre as a whole, especially the found footage subgenre, Creep does something bold by turning the camera inward. Most found footage horror is about external threats, demons, ghosts, haunted houses, government conspiracies. Creep makes the camera a psychological mirror. It's not interested in showing us monsters under the bed. It's interested in the human mind, in how people lie to each other, perform for each other, and slowly break under pressure. That shift from external to internal sets it apart and gives the franchise a distinct voice. And the brilliance is, it leaves you wondering, how many more people has Josef done this to? How long has this been going on? The movie doesn't tell you. It just gives you one chapter and lets your imagination fill in the blanks. That open-endedness makes the idea feel bigger than just one movie. It suggests a whole hidden web of victims, identities, and recordings. In this way, Creep becomes not just a story, it becomes a pattern of behavior. And that makes it endlessly expandable. With Creep 2, the franchise flips the script. We follow a different character, a vlogger who isn't quite as naive, and the dynamic between predator and prey becomes more complex. But it never stops feeling like the world that Creep built. There's a ritualistic vibe to it. Josef, or whatever his name is today, follows certain steps. It's like a twisted personal project. He films, he acts, he kills, and each film feels like another unsettling entry in his own disturbing documentary series. The franchise doesn't rely on big spectacle. It relies on character consistency. Josef isn't just a slasher villain. He's more like an indie horror version of Hannibal Lecter. Intimate, charismatic, and horrifying precisely because of how normal he tries to be. And that approach sets the tone for any future films. If we zoom out even further and think of Creep in the historical context of horror cinema, it lands at a fascinating moment. It came out in 2014, right in the middle of the horror genre's indie renaissance. Films like It Follows, The Babadook, The Witch, and Hereditary were all redefining what horror could be. Psychological depth, minimalist design, emotional resonance. All those elements were becoming the new currency. Creep fits perfectly into that wave, but it carves its own space by being more stripped down and experimental. It's not interested in elegance. It's interested in discomfort. It's lo-fi, offbeat, and entirely committed to awkward, skin-crawling interactions that you want to look away from, but can't. So while Creep may not have the sprawling lore of a Conjuring universe or the jump-scare machine of a Paranormal Activity saga, it builds its legacy differently. Through character, through method, through psychological chaos and quiet dread. It doesn't need ghosts. It doesn't need elaborate plots. It just needs one man, a camera, and the horrifying truth that some people are too good at pretending. And that's where the franchise finds its strength, in how it lingers, in how it dares to be simple, strange, and deeply human in the most terrifying way. Creep is the ultimate example of how you don't need a mountain of cash to build a spine-chilling psychological thriller that crawls under your skin and refuses to leave. This film didn't just have a small budget, it had a microscopic one by Hollywood standards. We're talking about a movie that was made with just one camera, a couple of props, and two actors. That's it. There's no fancy CGI, no sprawling sets, no dramatic explosions or costly action sequences. It's literally a story about two guys in a house with a handheld camera and a whole lot of tension. And guess what? That's exactly what makes it work. Instead of pouring money into visual spectacle, the filmmakers poured everything into the performance, the pacing, and the unsettling vibe that never lets you breathe easy. The budget, while never officially confirmed, is widely believed to be extremely low. Think micro-budget indie film territory. And yet the final product feels intentional, stripped down in a way that adds to the film's disturbing realism. Because the truth is, Creep doesn't look cheap. It looks authentic. Like something you accidentally stumbled across on a lost memory card. The handheld footage, the awkward silences, the intimate camera angles, it all feels unnervingly real. And the fact that this was achieved without the support of a big studio bankroll is impressive. Now, box office numbers for a movie like Creep are a bit of a tricky story. It didn't go the traditional theatrical route. This wasn't a blockbuster released in thousands of theaters with a multi-million-dollar marketing campaign. Nope. Creep played a few film festivals, got people talking, and then found its real audience when it landed on streaming. That's when things really took off. Thanks to Netflix, the film reached viewers far and wide, and suddenly people everywhere were whispering about this weird, creepy little horror flick with a guy in a wolf mask and a smile that could kill. It became a word-of-mouth hit, the kind of underground success story that thrives in the streaming age. So was it a financial success? Absolutely, but not in the conventional box office sense. This is a film that probably made back its budget several times, over simply by existing on a platform where horror fans could find it, share it, and obsess over it. And because it was so inexpensive to make, even modest streaming deals would have been enough to push it into profitable territory. Plus, it built a reputation. And that reputation is what gave us Creep 2 and talk of Creep 3. That's how you build a franchise in the indie world. Make something cheap, make it effective, and let it grow organically. And let's not forget the impact of the marketing, or the lack of traditional marketing, really. Creep didn't rely on billboards or trailers blasting before summer blockbusters. It relied on whispers. It relied on the kind of chilling word of mouth that spreads in late-night conversations between horror fans. Hey, have you seen Creep? That movie messed me up. That kind of buzz is priceless, and no marketing budget in the world can replicate it. So in the end, Creep didn't just beat the system. It quietly rewrote the rules of indie horror success. If you're in the mood for something deeply unsettling, minimalistic, and weirdly intimate, Creep is calling your name, and you don't have to dig through obscure corners of the internet to find it. This is one of those rare indie horror gems that made its way to the mainstream not through a big theatrical rollout, but by haunting its way into your living room via streaming. That's right, the easiest way to watch Creep is by firing up your favorite streaming platform, specifically one known for spotlighting edgy and offbeat content. It's available to stream, usually nestled among the platform's darker, more psychologically intense horror selections. You won't find it with flashy posters or huge banners. It lurks quietly, waiting for the right viewer to stumble upon it and press play, completely unaware of what they're about to experience. Now, watching Creep isn't just about pressing play. It's about how you watch it. This isn't a film you casually throw on while scrolling your phone or chatting with friends. No. Creep demands solitude. It thrives in silence. The best way to experience it is alone. Late at night, lights off, maybe a blanket nearby in case things get too real. You want to feel like you've stumbled across a personal video diary that you weren't supposed to see, like you're intruding on something private and strange. That's when Creep really works its eerie magic. The handheld camera work and the lo-fi sound design don't just tolerate low lighting and small screens, they benefit from them. It makes everything feel closer, tighter, more personal. Like Josef is speaking directly to you. If streaming isn't your thing and you're more of a collector or a rental kind of horror fan, don't worry. Digital rental options are usually available across major platforms. You can rent it for a night, dim the lights, and prepare to question your trust in Craigslist ads forever. And while a theatrical re-release would be fascinating, imagine watching this film in a pitch-black theater with strangers holding their breath at every awkward silence. Asterisk Creep Asterisk was really made for an at-home horror experience. It's the kind of film that gets under your skin precisely because it feels like something you're not supposed to be watching. Like you accidentally unearthed someone's personal archive and now well, now you can't unsee it. So whether you're watching it from your laptop, your TV, or your phone, if you dare, just remember, this isn't a blockbuster with explosions and jump scares every 5 minutes. This is slow burn psychological horror that latches onto you with charm, awkwardness, and a growing sense of dread. Find it. Watch it alone. And if someone ever offers to film you for the day in the woods, maybe just don't.